Hello, and welcome to Inventors Helping Inventors. I'm your host, Alan Beckley, inventor of the Wonder Wallet. If you're an inventor searching for proven ways to make money with your invention, if you dream to see your product selling in stores everywhere, you've come to the right place. There's no better place to get help than from experts, inventors who've already achieved success. Every week, I interview successful inventors, asking them the questions you want to know. Tune in to learn from the experts so you can get your invention out of the tank and into the bank.
There was this huge banner over the entrance that said, Zimmer Auto Transfusion Device. And that was my product. And I stood there and I cried. I was like, oh my gosh. This is so amazing.
Welcome to episode number 556. Today, I interview Julie Ryan. Julie Ryan grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and graduated from Ohio State University with a communications degree. She began her career as a sales rep in the medical supply industry and was in that industry for 30 years. During that time, she invented and successfully commercialized 2 different medical surgery devices. She got mailbox money for over 20 years. Over time, her career transitioned into a very different arena. She became very interested in spiritual healing and soon mastered the art of medical intuition, spirit communication, and energy healing. She was able to blend her business acumen as the founder of 9 different businesses with extraordinary spiritual insight. Today, she's known as a buffet of psychicness, able to scan the human body, detect illnesses, facilitate energetic healings, access past lives, and communicate with spirits, both living and deceased, all from a distance. She's also the host of the hit podcast, Ask Julie Ryan, ranked in the top 0.05% of podcasts and streamed in over 100 countries, where she scans callers live each week and shares insights that bridge the practical and the mystical. Above all, Julie is a wife, mother, grandmother, and friend, proof that it's possible to live fully grounded in both the spiritual and the real world. You'll want to listen to this entire interview where Julie shares how she was able to successfully sue a $30 billion Swiss pharmaceutical company and their raft of attorneys, and then to license her product for royalties to Zimmer Biomet, the #1 global orthopedic supplier. Also, how her specialized operating room mat reduces fluids on the floor, making the OR space safer and more sanitary. And finally, why she believes that the principle of attraction, used properly, will ensure that the right people show up in your life when you need them, and how intuition can guide your key decisions. Now let's get right to our interview with Julie Ryan. Well, Julie Ryan, it is a pleasure to have you on the podcast with us today.
Oh, my honor. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And Julie, to kick this off, could you share a bit of your background with our listeners? Like, where did you grow up and where did you go to school? And also, what did you do before you became an inventor? Could you share that with us?
Sure. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. I am a graduate of the Ohio State University. Yes, that's right. We are the national champions in football right now and the #1 team in the country for you college football fans. And now I live in Birmingham, Alabama. So it's a roll tide, go Bucks, a life that I lead. And I have a degree in communications. I was in the medical supply industry for 30 years as an inventor and manufacturer. Started out as a sales rep. And those are the inventions that I came up with are in that medical surgical space.
Thank you so much for that. And yeah, the Ohio State University, I'm quite a big college football fan. I'm from Texas A&M. I'm an Aggie.
Oh,
But I could imagine the challenge of an Ohio State fan being in Alabama territory in Birmingham, Roll Tide and all of that good stuff. So that could be an interesting challenge, I suspect. But yeah, Ohio State is an amazing football team, and I think they're rightfully number one. And don't know how long they'll stay there, but I think they're a great team.
My husband and my son both went to Alabama, and I was a volunteer sorority advisor at Alabama for 12 years. So I love both schools.
There you go. From perusing your website, I would say that you and Marie Forleo, you're both what she calls a multi-passionate entrepreneur, really throughout your 45-year business career. As you described, in starting, you've worked extensively. Most currently, you've worked extensively in the psychic healing space, as well as intuition and past lives. But as you described, you're also a successful inventor in the medical realm with a variety of surgical devices you've patented. So for this podcast episode, it's that area that we'll probably primarily focus on, the inventing side of it. But how did you come to invent in the medical field and especially surgical devices? You mentioned that, but maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. I think everybody's story is so fun to hear, isn't it? We can't even imagine the trajectory that our lives are going to take. And yet, when we look back on them, we think, oh, yeah, I can see how that led to that, led to that. I, right out of Ohio State, went to work for a company called American Hospital Supply, which is now called Cardinal Health. It was the biggest in the industry in America. Excuse me. And I was a sales rep, and I sold hundreds of thousands of hospital supplies. I was working in Southern California. At that point in the mid 80s, there were 255 hospitals in LA County alone, Alan. And so that kept me very busy. And back then, that's when AIDS was really starting to come on the scene. And it was mainly focused, it seemed, in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York. And people were scared to death because they were afraid to get transfusions. They were afraid to be stuck by a needle. Just the hype and the fear and all of that was just out of control. And so one day I had a friend who knew of a product that was being used in vascular surgery to collect the patient's blood and put their own blood back into them so they didn't have to use bank blood, somebody else's blood. And he said, can you take some of these devices around and show them to your operating room supervisors and see what they think? So I did. And they all said, oh my goodness, do you have any idea what you have here? The timing couldn't be more perfect. And so I reported back to my friend, and he said, why don't you start a company and distribute this in California? And I said, I don't know, let me look into it. And I did, long story short. And then fast forward, after about a year, we introduced it to the American marketplace. It had been used in Europe for about 10 years. And I had some doctors that were orthopedists who were jerry-rigging this device that was primarily for vascular surgery. They were jerry-rigging it, and they were using it for total joint orthopedic surgery. And I said, I don't know that you guys can do that. I think the FDA needs to see some clinical testing before we can really get away with that. And so I helped develop a product like that. And then it was so successful that the company with whom I was working, the manufacturer, basically said, you've done such a great job, Julie, you and your team, that we need to go with an international supplier. Thanks so much. See you. Bye. And I said, I don't think so, guys. I got this agreement here with you, and it's got a 3-year automatic renewal if I meet my numbers. So long story short, I sued them. They were a $30 billion Swiss pharmaceutical company parent. I was working with the American subsidiaries. Spent 10 days in federal court in Boston in January of 1990, won the case, and then started a company to compete with them for that one product. And that's where my first patent came in. I brought in some brilliant engineers. I have a communications degree. I don't know engineering or manufacturing. At that point, I didn't know manufacturing. I was in my mid-20s. And so I brought in a team, and I was the idea girl, and I knew everything that was wrong with everybody else's product out there, and I knew what we needed to have a product do. So we broke their patents, and the company that I sued and won against, they had gone with the number 4 global supplier in orthopedics, and I did a licensing deal with the number 1 global supplier. So back then, Alan, I called it mailbox money because I got royalty fees. We didn't have the internet yet, and there wasn't any digital currency happening. So I got a big check every quarter, and that lasted for about 20 years. We got a secondary patent on it, and it was amazing. And then I invented other things along the line, but that was my first invention. And what a joy. May I share one other fun story about that?
Of course.
I was at a big orthopedic surgery convention. I think they had, I don't know, 10,000 surgeons there or something from all over the world. And it was at the Moscone Convention Center in San Francisco. And this was in probably about 1990, I would say. And one of the most joyful days of my life was I went to the convention center, and when you walked in this huge building with thousands of vendors there, all kinds of orthopedic devices and whatever, there was this huge banner over the entrance that said Zimmer Auto Transfusion Device. And that was my product. And I stood there and I cried. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. And so it was a wonderful relationship.
It's a really great story, and there's so many points, two or three key points I'd like to share with our listeners. One of the ones that I think that you brought up, especially in the 1980s, and you said 255 hospitals in LA County.
Right.
And at that time, AIDS was a big focus, especially you said San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York. And I remember back in that time that AIDS was basically a death penalty. Most people viewed it as it's just a matter of when that I'm going to die from it. And so it was something that was almost verboten. People were really afraid of it and all the rest of it. So the idea of having something that could collect a patient's blood and then retransfuse it into them, so there's less risk with them picking up perhaps AIDS or other things from a different blood collection, that seemingly that was almost like a timing, situation, like the timing couldn't have been better than that. And I believe flash forward to 2020 with COVID, I think there's going to be no telling how many businesses that are going to spin out of that, and the fact that people have reconsidered their life and their life directions and things like that, and whether they're really happy in their job. And I suspect we'll see a lot of new inventions ultimately that come out of that realm. If you look around, you do connect the dots, and things going on in your life can point you towards opportunities you might not have seen otherwise. And I think your story certainly shows that. And also, I love the excitement you had when you saw Zimmer Auto Transfusion Device and knew that was your product. And just when I licensed my wallets to All-Star Products, and I could go into Walmart and say, oh, by the way, I'm the inventor of that. And then say, what? It was just fun to see people buying your product and that sort of thing. And that's probably one of the best delights of being successful as an inventor, as well as you said, mailbox money, especially 20 years. That's a pretty amazing run.
Yeah, it was over 20 years because we got a secondary patent, so it prolonged the protectability of it. And you're absolutely right about bloodborne diseases in transfusions from the blood bank. And they didn't have a test to see if that blood was tainted with AIDS. And I actually know somebody whose mother died of leukemia, and she got the leukemia from a blood transfusion.
Wow. I also like to congratulate you on winning a lawsuit, because lawsuits are extremely challenging. And the one rule of thumb that I go by is the attorneys on both sides always get paid. That's the one certainty of any lawsuit.
And the thing that was so much fun about that was, at the time, I wasn't even 30 yet, Alan. And I'm sure these big business guys were going, that businesswoman thinks she is. She's young, she's female, and she even has blonde hair. But I'm thinking, buddies, you are messing with the wrong girl. And a fun story about that, again, we didn't have the internet yet. and I'm based in LA, and the lawsuit was in federal court in Boston for 10 days. And I walked into court that first day, and they had 5 attorneys there. It was a multi-billion-dollar global company I was suing. So, of course, they had unlimited legal opportunities. But the thing that was so funny about it, Alan, and I just think it's all divine guidance and divine intervention. I was in my lawyer's office, and he said, we're going to need somebody who's an economist that can show what the damages are going to be going forward. How much money are you going to lose by them breaching this contract? And he said, there's this professor at Southern Cal at USC who I use a lot for trials. And he said, this guy did his undergrad and master's at Harvard and did his PhD at MIT. We're going to be in Boston where their schools are located. And he told me his name, and it was a different name, ethnic name. And I said, interesting. I went to high school with a guy who had that name in Columbus, Ohio, at Bishop Watterson. I wonder if it's the same guy. And so I called his office because we didn't have the internet yet, no email yet. I called his office and I left a voicemail. And sure enough, that was the guy who graduated from high school with me, Alan. And he was my expert witness at that trial. Now, you can't make that up. What's the chance of that happening? And I think that it's a great indicator of how I've lived my life. And I always recommend for people to think of, just expect that the people that you need to show up are going to show up exactly right when you need them. And they always do. And they have throughout my whole life. That's just one example.
That's a fascinating story. I'd really like to speak to that a little bit. It'll actually segue to our next point as well. But it's really the principle of attraction. You tend to draw towards you what you focus on most. And it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. If you focus on bad things, you'll draw lots of those bad things your way. But if you focus on what it is you really want and visualize it, you will those serendipities will happen. And as you said, first of all, I believe there's no coincidence, right? So it's like, what are the odds of it being the same person I went to high school with? And it seems like the odds would be really low, but it turns out they weren't low at all. So there's another, I think it's a Chinese proverb that I really like. And it says, the master will appear when the student is ready. And I think there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
So that's a great, inspiring story. And then I'd like to segue in that your primary focus now is focused more upon psychic healing, intuition, and past lives work. Can you connect the dots for our listeners? How did you make that transition, your career evolve over time from, as you said, the surgical, medical sales, and then now more into the mystical arena? Could you share with us for a few minutes how that evolution came about in your life?
Sure. Would you like to hear about my other invention, my other big invention?
Yes, absolutely.
It also is a surgical device, and it's a big mat, Alan, that goes on the floor, and it's used during, I'm using air quotes here, wet procedures like knee scopes, shoulder scopes, hip scopes, some urology stuff. But it's primarily orthopedic stuff. And again, I had people that I knew who were in the operating room, and they said, this is such a pain. For instance, when a knee is scoped, they'll use just liters and liters of irrigation fluid, and it's on the floor of the operating room. And the staff wears galoshes, and they slip and they fall in it, and it's contaminated because it's coming out of the patient. It was a nightmare. So I had somebody come to me and say, hey, boy, if you can solve this problem, this is going to be a huge thing for you. And I said, all right. So we came up with this idea to make a mat, and it's like has a basin in it. It's maybe the whole thing's maybe an inch tall. Think of a picture frame, and then there's a basin in it. And then we snaked tubing through it with holes in it to suck up fluid. And then we put a polyfiber padding on top, which prevented splashing because, for instance, when a knee or a shoulder is being scoped, it's 4 or 5 feet up off the ground. So, that it's pressurized fluid that's going into the patient. to irrigate it, and it, it bounces everywhere. Came up with this product, hooked it up to suction canisters, and it got the fluid, contained the fluid, and then eliminated the fluid, kept it all contained within a suction system. And so we called that the Bass. And that's a fun product name because I was in surgery one day with prototypes and we were testing them. I was in Nashville, Tennessee, and this Bubba of an ortho tech looked at me and goes, "Lady, this is one big ass suction system. Y'all need to call this thing the Bass." And I said, "All right." So I trademarked it, of course. And so we decided to use Bass as the name of it. And in order to use big ass suction system to trademark it, it's got to be on interstate transit. So we put it on the label. And one day I got a call from my customer service people because I manufactured the Bass and then sold it both domestically and internationally. And I got a call from my customer service gal, and she said, "We got this guy that you need to talk to because he has a problem with the name." So I called him, and it was a Catholic hospital, I think, in Milwaukee. And he said, "Do you think that's appropriate to send into a Catholic hospital and on the label?" And I said, "I think it's funny." And he said, "Yeah, but do you think it's appropriate?" And I wanted to say, "What do you have, Sister Mary Holy Water unpacking boxes in your receiving department?" But I didn't. And so I said, "Again, I think it's funny." And then he cracked up, Alan, and he said, "We love it so much that everybody in my department has a copy of your label on their bulletin board in their offices." I said, "Okay, good." So I sold that company in 2015 to a global surgical device manufacturing company. And then at that point, I thought, all right, now what? Because I have founded 9 companies in 5 industries. And I thought, all right, what's next? And that's when I went into the woo space. So a fun lead in to get to the energy healing and medical intuition and all of the things that come with that.
Podcaster James Wedmore is very much into the woo as well. He calls it business by design and business from the inside out, saying you start with your attitude and all of these things, and your achievements come as a result of the space between your 2 ears in most cases. So that's a good point. But so now we can transition to what you're doing now. Might maybe share with our listeners how you've gotten, for lack of a better way to describe it, psychic healing, intuition, past lives, as well as some other things. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing today?
Sure. I am not one of those psychics who had dead people chasing her since childhood, or if I did, Ellen, I didn't know it, let alone what I would have done with that information. I learned how to do all of this stuff. And how it came about was a girlfriend gave me a book called Anatomy of the Spirit by Carolyn Mace, who called herself a medical intuitive. And I thought, what the heck is that? I'd been in the medical supply industry for decades at that point, and I want to know more. So back then, again, we didn't have the internet yet. This is 30 years ago. And so I went to a bookstore and I found a book called Anatomy of the Spirit, written by a former NASA physicist named Barbara Brennan, who parlayed very complex quantum physics principles into understandable non-scientific languaging for the person who isn't a scientist like me. And she was utilizing quantum energy to help facilitate healing. And so that really piqued my interest. And I studied it for about 6 years. And at that point, I had these companies going on. I was mom and a wife and doing all the regular stuff. And my friends and family said, "Why are you doing this?" And I'd say, "I don't know." And they'd say, "What are you going to do with it?" I'd say, "Again, I have no clue. I just find it fascinating." Fast forward 30 years, now I tell people I'm a buffet of psychicness, because what I've realized is once we connect with spirit, we can do it all. And my whole buffet includes, we can talk to your dead grandma, Helen. We can talk to any spirit that's attached to a body or not. You don't have to have known them. Who do you want to talk to? Moses, Elvis, whoever. It doesn't matter. I'm like a human MRI. With somebody's permission, I can see inside their bodies and I can see broken bones, torn ligaments, viral infections, bacterial infections, cancer, whatever. Help facilitate healings, spirit working through me and with me to help the person heal themselves. Because nobody ever heals anybody else. We all heal ourselves. For example, if you have a big cut in your leg and you go to the emergency room, the doctor's going to stitch it up, but the doctor don't make your skin grow back. You make your own skin grow back. And that's how this works. It's me helping as part of the healing equation. I can tell how close to death somebody is. We can talk to your pets. We can do healings on your pets. We can do past life stuff. We can talk to your angels, your spirit guides. And we're all doing this stuff, Alan, especially we inventors, because where do we think those ideas come from? They don't come from our heads. I was a communications major. I didn't know anything about engineering or how to invent stuff. And it all comes from spirit. Those are all what I call divine downloads. And how it works is our heads are like big satellite dishes and they receive and transmit frequencies. Every spirit has a frequency they keep throughout all their lifetimes. Every thought has a frequency. When you have a thought about something, like you're in the process of inventing something and you think, okay, what's going to be the best? You just ask in your head, what's going to be the best material for me to use for this device? You're going to get an answer and it's going to come into your head instantly, fast as you can snap your fingers, or sometimes even before. That's guidance from spirit. You can use it on anything and everything along your inventor journey, along everything in your life. Just ask, either aloud or in your head. Think of AI, attention, intention. My attention is what kind of material is going to be best for my device. Intention, I'm going to be told the right material to use. And what you said before, the law of attraction, that's how easy it is. We're all doing it. We just don't realize it.
Such a fascinating story and good information. And there's so much that you've got going there. And I think a lot of people would like to very likely know more about that as well. So as we roll towards a close, are there any parting words you'd like to leave us with?
Expect that everybody that you need to show up is going to show up exactly when you need them. Expect the situations to unfold perfectly. They always do, even if it doesn't feel like it at the moment. And then just ask questions. Ask them aloud, ask them in your head. You're going to hear an answer on any topic. And, what patent lawyer should I use? What should I call this device? All these things. I was doing that, but I didn't understand where the information was coming from because I hadn't learned woo yet. But we're all doing it. We all have experienced a time where we think of somebody and we either run into them or they email us or they call us or they text us and we say, oh my gosh, what a coincidence. I was just thinking of you. That's not a coincidence. That's your intuitive abilities that are at play. The other thing is, if something doesn't feel right, pay attention to how it feels in your gut. If it doesn't feel right, don't do it. Start asking questions. Start asking questions in your head. Again, every thought has a frequency. You're going to attract the thoughts that you need to guide you on your path.
That's just amazing. And my last question for you is, how can our listeners reach you if they have other questions?
AskJulieRyan.com. AskJulieRyan.com. I have a podcast. We're on YouTube. We're on all the podcast networks. And anybody that would like a free digital and audiobook copy of my book, Angelic Attendants, What Really Happens as We Transition from This Life into the Next, you'll see when you go to AskJulieRyan.com, there's a button on the top of the homepage that says, send me a free copy of the book, because we all know we're going to lose loved ones and we're going to be in that situation ourselves one day. And my book talks about how we're all surrounded by angels and the spirits of deceased loved ones. in pets as we're transitioning. And by the way, university-based research shows that 90% of people at the end of their lives see the spirits of deceased loved ones in pets. So come get a free copy. We've got it in Spanish too, for those of you that prefer Spanish.
I really enjoyed chatting with you today and learning about your inventions and your life journey and where it's taken you over all this time. It's just a fascinating story. And again, our listeners can reach you at askjulieryan.com. That's JULIERYAN, I believe, .com.
Correct.
And they can get a free book there right on the upper right-hand corner of your website.
That's right. Just right at the top of the website, you'll see, click here for your free book.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the podcast with us today. And maybe we'll touch bases another 6 months or a year and see what you've got going on at that time.
I would love that. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. I want to take just a couple of moments to do something I don't do often enough, and that is to give you a huge thanks for being a loyal listener to the Inventors Helping Inventors podcast. If you've listened to 2 episodes, or 200, or 400, or anywhere in between, you are a loyal listener, and I appreciate every single one of you. This particular week is very important and meaningful to me. Why? Because on January 14th and 2019, I started this podcast 6 years ago. And I have to tell you, when I first started this podcast, I didn't know if I could find 50 inventors I could interview for the podcast, much less over 300 that I found and more coming to me every day. It's absolutely amazing, and I just love this journey. Without you and podcast listeners all over the world, this podcast would certainly not be going. So once again, I want to thank you. I'm so excited to now have gone on for 6 years with this podcast. My goal is to help you and inventors all over the world by bringing you interesting guests with interesting inventions and cool products, and to share their life stories, their challenges, and their aha moments with you. I hope this will help you as you go through the challenges with your own invention. Now, I'd like to finish with a small favor, and that is, if you could take just a couple of moments and give me not only a rating, preferably 5 stars, but also a review on either Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, that would be amazing. It helps the podcast more than you might know to keep going and to draw other listeners just like you. And sometimes inventors tell me, well, I don't listen to podcasts, so where do I find it? If they tell you that, here's what you tell them. They can always find the podcast on www.alanbeckley.com/podcast. They can find every episode there. So thank you again for being a loyal listener, and more is coming in 2025. Thanks so much for tuning in to Inventors Helping Inventors. If you like the show, please tell your friends about it. Make sure to subscribe in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts so you won't miss a single episode. Talk to you soon.